Good evening, and welcome. Tonight we're going to travel back in time, nearly 3,000 years, to the civilization that gave the Western world its philosophy, its democracy, its myths, and its science. Ancient Greece, but not the Greece of the textbooks, the dates, the battles, the lists of philosophers. Tonight, we're going to explore the things about ancient Greece that we still don't understand. The riddles, the lost wonders, the secrets that more than 2,000 years have failed to give up. You don't need to do anything. You don't need to remember anything. There will be no quiz at the end, no important details you might miss. Just let these mysteries wash over you like the warm waters of the Aegean, lapping gently against white marble beneath a sky full of stars. So dim the lights. Get comfortable and let's begin our journey into the unsolved mysteries of ancient Greece. Let us begin with the most famous mystery of them all, a story so powerful that people have searched for it for over 2,000 years. Atlantis. The strange thing about Atlantis is that we know exactly where the story comes from. It comes from one man, the philosopher Plato. Around the year 360 before the Common Era, in two of his written dialogues, Plato described a great and powerful island civilization. He said it lay beyond the Pillars of Hercules, what we now call the Strait of Gibraltar. He described it in remarkable detail. A great city, built in rings of land and water, one inside the other. A wealthy, advanced, powerful people who ruled a vast empire. But the Atlanteans grew arrogant, corrupt, greedy for power, and so the gods punished them. In a single day and night of earthquakes and floods, Plato wrote, the entire island sank beneath the sea and vanished forever. And here is the mystery that has tormented people ever since. Did Plato make it up, or was he remembering something real? Plato insisted the story was true. He said it had been passed down from the Egyptian priests to a famous Greek statesman named Solon, and down through the generations to Plato himself. A true account of a real lost civilization that had existed 9,000 years before his time. Most scholars today believe Atlantis was a fiction, a kind of parable. Plato invented the perfect, doomed civilization to make a point about pride and the dangers of corruption. But not everyone is sure, because some details are strangely specific, and some people wonder whether Plato wove his moral tale around the memory of a real catastrophe. There is one intriguing candidate. Around 1,600 years before Plato, a massive volcanic eruption destroyed the Greek island of Thera, what we now call Santorini. It was one of the largest eruptions in human history. It collapsed the center of the island into the sea and sent tidal waves crashing across the Mediterranean, helping to devastate the brilliant Minoan civilization on nearby Crete. A wealthy island culture, advanced for its time, partly swallowed by the sea in a single natural catastrophe. Could a distant memory of that disaster, carried down through 1,000 years of storytelling, have become the legend of Atlantis? We will never know for certain. And so the search goes on. People still look for Atlantis. In the Atlantic, in the Mediterranean, beneath the sands of the Sahara, under the ice of Antarctica. They have never found it, because it may never have existed, or because it is still down there, waiting in the dark water, exactly as Plato said. Here is a mystery about the most sacred place in the Greek world, high on the slopes of Mount Parnassus. there was a temple, and within it sat a woman who could see the future. She was called the Pythia, the Oracle of Delphi. For over 1,000 years, she was the most important religious figure in Greece. Kings and generals, ordinary citizens, and foreign rulers all journeyed to Delphi to ask her questions. Should we go to war? Should I marry? Where should we build our new city? And the Pythia would answer. But here is the strange part. To deliver her prophecies, she would enter a trance. She sat over a crack in the rock, in the depths of the temple, and breathed in vapors that rose from below. And in that altered state, she would speak the words of the god Apollo. Her prophecies were famously riddling, mysterious, open to interpretation. The most famous example, a king asked whether he should attack a neighboring empire. The oracle replied that if he did, he would destroy a great empire. Encouraged, he attacked, and he did destroy a great empire, his own. For centuries, scholars dismissed the vapors as a myth. There was no crack, no gas. It was just a story. But then, in modern times, geologists studied the site, and they discovered that the Temple of Delphi sits directly on the intersection of two geological faults, and rising through those faults were gases, including one, a sweet-smelling gas, that in mild doses can produce a trance-like euphoric state, and in strong doses can be deadly. The oracle may have been breathing real intoxicating fumes rising from the earth itself for over 1,000 years. But the deeper mystery remains. How did the oracle get so many things right? Ancient writers record prophecy after prophecy. That came true. Was it clever priests gathering information and crafting cunning, ambiguous answers? Was it simply that vague predictions can be made to fit anything after the fact? Or was there something we still don't understand happening on that mountain? The oracle fell silent at last when Greece turned to a new religion. The last recorded prophecy is hauntingly sad. When a messenger came to ask a question, the oracle replied that the beautiful temple had fallen, that Apollo no longer had a home, no longer had a spring that spoke, that the talking water had dried up. After 1,000 years of prophecy, the oracle's final message was about her own ending. Here is a mystery that you can almost hold in your hand. We spoke of it once before when we explored the mysteries of Rome. But it is, in truth, a Greek invention, and it deserves its own place in the story of Greece. The Antikythera Mechanism. In the year 1900, sponge divers off the tiny Greek island of Antikythera discovered an ancient shipwreck, a Greek ship that had sunk over 2,000 years before, laden with treasures, bronze statues, glassware, coins, and among the treasures, raised from the seabed, was a corroded lump of bronze and wood. It sat ignored in a museum until someone noticed. It contained gears, tiny, precise, interlocking bronze gears. Nothing like it would appear again for well over 1,000 years. The knowledge to build such a thing was thought to be far beyond the ancient world. But the Greeks had built it. Using modern imaging, scientists have finally understood what it was. An astronomical calculator, a hand-cranked computer made of bronze that could predict the positions of the sun and moon, forecast eclipses years in advance, track the cycles of the planets, and even count down to the next Olympic Games. It is, by far, the most sophisticated machine to survive from the ancient world, and it forces us to completely rethink what the Greeks were capable of. And here is the mystery that haunts the historians. A device this refined could not possibly have been the first of its kind. The craftsmanship is too assured. There must have been earlier, simpler versions, a whole tradition of Greek engineering, building up to this. So where is the rest of it? Why is this the only one we have ever found? The terrible answer is probably this: bronze was valuable. When devices like this broke or grew old, they were almost certainly melted down, and the metal reused. This one survived, for one reason only, because it sank to the bottom of the sea, where no one could reach it to melt it down, which means an entire branch of ancient Greek science and engineering may have existed, flourished, and then vanished completely, melted away, leaving behind a single accidental survivor at the bottom of the Aegean. How much did they know that we will never recover? How much advanced knowledge was simply melted down for scrap and lost forever? The Antikythera Mechanism is not just a marvel, it is a warning about how much of the ancient world we have lost. Let us turn now to a weapon of legend, a weapon so strange and so terrifying that historians still argue about what it actually was. Greek fire. In the centuries after ancient Greece, the Greek-speaking Eastern Roman Empire, centered on the great city of Constantinople, possessed a secret weapon, a weapon that saved their empire again and again for centuries. It was a liquid fire. They would spray it from siphons mounted on their ships onto enemy vessels, and it would burst into flame. But this was no ordinary fire. It could not be put out with water. In fact, the ancient accounts say, water made it burn even more fiercely. It would float on the surface of the sea, still burning, setting fire to everything it touched. It clung to whatever it landed on. Entire enemy fleets were destroyed by it. It was, in the ancient world, something close to a weapon of mass destruction. And here is the mystery. We have no idea how to make it. The recipe was one of the most closely guarded state secrets in history. It was known only to a handful of people, passed down within a single family of engineers, and within the imperial court. It was so secret that it was never written down completely. And then the empire fell, and the secret died with it. For centuries, scholars have tried to reconstruct it. They have guessed at the ingredients. Perhaps petroleum naturally seeping from the ground. Perhaps resin. Perhaps quicklime, which reacts violently with water, which might explain why water made it worse. Perhaps sulfur. Perhaps some combination, heated and pressurized and sprayed through bronze tubes. But no one has ever truly reproduced it. The exact recipe, the precise process, the secret that made it work, is gone. It is one of the great lost technologies of history, a weapon so feared that its very name became a legend. And we, with all our modern science, still cannot say for certain what it was made of. The Greeks took the secret of their fire to the grave. Here is a mystery about a people who left almost nothing behind. When we think of ancient Greece, we usually think of Athens, the philosophers, the democracy, the great theaters and temples. The Athenians wrote constantly. They left us libraries of words. But there was another Greek city, a rival, as different from Athens as it is possible to be. Sparta. The Spartans were the most feared warriors in the Greek world. Their entire society was built around one purpose, producing perfect soldiers. From birth, a Spartan's life belonged to the state. Boys were taken from their families at the age of 7 and raised in brutal communal barracks, trained in endurance, combat, and pain. We know these things, but here is the mystery. We know them, almost entirely, from outsiders, because the Spartans themselves wrote almost nothing down. They were deliberately secretive. They discouraged writing, philosophy, and the arts. They didn't build great monuments. An ancient historian noted that if the city of Sparta were ever abandoned and left in ruins, future generations would never believe that it had once been so powerful. There would be nothing to see, no great temples, no grand buildings, just emptiness. And that is almost exactly what happened. Athens left us the Parthenon, the theaters, the philosophy. Sparta left us almost nothing. So much of what we know about Sparta comes from writers who were not Spartan, who admired them or feared them or romanticized them, often writing long after Sparta's golden age had passed. The Spartans became a legend, and it is genuinely difficult to separate the real Sparta from the myth that grew around it. We don't fully understand their strange dual kingship, 2 kings ruling at once. We don't fully understand the secret police, who, the sources hint darkly, would move among the population at night. We don't fully understand the rituals, the festivals, the inner life of their society. The most disciplined, most famous warrior culture in history kept its true self, hidden. They guarded their secrets in life, and in death they simply vanished, leaving the rest of us to argue forever about who they really were. Let us talk now about a wonder of the world that no longer exists. The ancient Greeks and their neighbors built 7 structures so magnificent that they became known as the 7 wonders of the ancient world. Of those 7, only one still stands today, the Great Pyramid of Egypt. The other 6 are gone, and several of them hold mysteries. Consider the Colossus of Rhodes, an enormous bronze statue of the sun god Helios, over 30 meters tall, that stood at the harbor of the Greek island of Rhodes. It was one of the tallest statues of the ancient world. It stood for only 56 years before an earthquake snapped it at the knees and brought it crashing down. And here is a small mystery. The popular image, the one in countless paintings, shows the Colossus straddling the harbor entrance, with ships sailing between its legs. But it almost certainly never stood that way. The engineering would have been impossible, and building it across the harbor would have closed the harbor for the 12 years it took to construct. So where did it actually stand? What did it actually look like? We genuinely don't know. No reliable image survives, the most famous statue of the ancient world, and we cannot picture it with any confidence. Even after it fell, the Colossus was so impressive that the broken pieces lay on the ground for centuries, and tourists came from across the world just to see the ruins. Eventually, the bronze was sold for scrap and carried away and melted down, and so it vanished completely. Then there was the lighthouse of Alexandria. In the Greek-ruled city of Alexandria in Egypt, one of the tallest buildings in the ancient world, topped by a mysterious mirror that could reflect the sunlight and the firelight far out to sea. Some ancient writers claimed the mirror could even be used to burn enemy ships at a distance or to magnify distant objects. Was this true or legend? We don't know exactly how the Great Mirror worked or what it was made of. The technology, like so much else, was lost when the lighthouse fell. 6 wonders of the world, reduced to fragments and stories. We know they existed, we have descriptions, but we cannot fully picture them, cannot fully understand them, cannot bring them back. They are wonders that we can only imagine. Here is a quieter mystery, a mystery of words. The ancient Greeks wrote an extraordinary amount. Plays, poems, histories, philosophy, science. It was one of the most literary civilizations the world had ever seen. And the overwhelming majority of it is gone. Consider the great playwrights of Athens. Sophocles, one of the most celebrated, is believed to have written around 120 plays. How many survive complete? 7. Just 7. Out of 120. The rest are lost. We have only their titles and a few scattered quotations, preserved by other writers. And Sophocles was lucky. Of many other playwrights, we have nothing at all but names and fragments. Of the poet Sappho, considered one of the greatest poets of the ancient world, we have only one complete poem and a scattering of fragments. The rest, thousands of lines, simply gone. Where did it all go? It was not destroyed in one great catastrophe, though the famous burning of the Library of Alexandria has become the symbol of such loss. The truth is sadder and slower. Books in the ancient world had to be copied by hand, over and over, generation after generation, or they would crumble and vanish. And at some point, people simply stopped copying most of them. Tastes changed, empires fell, languages shifted, and the works that no one chose to copy slowly rotted away and were lost forever. We are left with a strange partial inheritance, a fraction. Imagine a vast library, and almost all of it has burned, and you are left to understand the whole from the handful of books that happen to survive. And here is the haunting part. Every so often, a lost work is rediscovered. A fragment of papyrus used to wrap a mummy turns out to contain lost lines of poetry. A faded manuscript, scraped clean and written over, reveals, underneath, a lost mathematical treatise, which means they are still out there, lost masterpieces of the ancient world, waiting in the sands of Egypt, in forgotten libraries, beneath the ink of other books. We have lost most of ancient Greece's mind, but not, perhaps, all of it. Not yet. Not forever. Here is a mystery about a labyrinth and a monster. On the Greek island of Crete, long before the golden age of Athens, there flourished one of the earliest great civilizations of Europe. We call them the Minoans, and from them comes one of the most famous legends in the world, the legend of the Labyrinth. The story goes that King Minos of Crete had a maze constructed beneath his palace, a labyrinth so complex that no one who entered could ever find their way out. And at its center lurked a monster, the Minotaur, a creature with the body of a man and the head of a bull. Every year, the legend says, young people were sent into the maze as sacrifices to be devoured by the beast, until a hero named Theseus entered the labyrinth, killed the Minotaur, and found his way back out by unwinding a thread behind him. It is a myth, but like so many Greek myths, it may be wrapped around a kernel of truth. When archaeologists excavated the great Minoan palace at Knossos on Crete, they found something extraordinary. An enormous, sprawling building with hundreds of interconnected rooms, corridors, staircases, and chambers on multiple levels, so complex and confusing that it could genuinely feel like a maze. And throughout the palace, they found images of bulls, bulls everywhere, wall paintings of young people leaping over the horns of charging bulls in some kind of ritual or sport. The bull was clearly sacred to the Minoans, central to their culture in a way we still don't fully understand. So here is the mystery. Did the legend of the Labyrinth grow out of a real memory? A memory of a vast, maze-like palace and a culture obsessed with bulls, and perhaps rituals involving them that the later Greeks only dimly remembered and transformed into the story of the Minotaur? And the deeper mystery is this: we still cannot fully read the Minoans' own writing. They used a script we call Linear A, and despite over a century of effort, no one has ever deciphered it. We can see their beautiful art, we can walk through their palaces, but we cannot read their words. We do not know what language they spoke, what they called themselves, what their myths truly were, or what really happened in the maze-like halls of Knossos. The Minoans left us a labyrinth indeed, not of stone, but of silence, and we are still lost inside it. Here is a mystery that strikes at the very heart of Greek identity. Homer. He is perhaps the most important poet who ever lived. 2 epic poems are attributed to him: the Iliad, the story of the Trojan War, and the Odyssey, the tale of a hero's long journey home. These 2 poems stand at the very foundation of Western literature. Everything, in a sense, comes after them, and we know almost nothing about the man who wrote them. We don't know when Homer lived. Estimates span centuries. We don't know where he was born. 7 different cities claimed him. We don't know if he was blind, as tradition holds. We don't even know for certain that he existed at all. Because here is the mystery. The Iliad and the Odyssey were composed in an age before writing was widely used in Greece. They come from a tradition of oral poetry, vast stories memorized and performed aloud, passed down and reshaped by generations of singers. So was Homer, a single brilliant poet who composed these masterpieces? Or was Homer simply a name attached to poems that were really the work of many singers over many generations, slowly perfected and finally written down and credited to one legendary figure? Scholars have argued about this for centuries. They call it the Homeric question. And there is no agreed answer. It is a strange and humbling thought. At the very foundation of Western literature stands a figure who may be one person, or many, or no one in particular, a name attached to genius, floating free of any real, knowable human being. We have the poems. They are immortal. But the poet, if there ever was a single poet, has dissolved completely into the mist of time. And here is a final mystery, one that touches the city of Troy itself. For most of history, people assumed the Trojan War was pure myth, a beautiful story invented by Homer, a war fought over a stolen queen, with gods taking sides, and a city brought down by a wooden horse. Surely, none of it was real. And then, in the 1870s, a determined and controversial amateur named Heinrich Schliemann began digging at a hill in modern Turkey, where he believed Troy had stood, and he found a city. In fact, he found many cities, layer upon layer, built one on top of another, going back thousands of years. There really had been a great city there, in roughly the right place, at roughly the right time, that had been destroyed, more than once, by fire and by war. So Troy was real. The place existed. A powerful city stood there and was destroyed around the time the legends suggest. But here the mystery deepens rather than resolves. Was there really a Trojan War, as Homer described? Was it fought by the Greeks over a stolen queen? Did a great king named Agamemnon truly lead 1,000 ships across the sea? We cannot say. We have found the city, but we have not found the proof of the story. We don't know if Helen existed, or Achilles, or whether the war was anything like the legend. The wooden horse may be pure poetry, or a metaphor for a siege engine, or a memory of an earthquake that the Greeks attributed to their sea god. Troy sits at that haunting border between history and myth, real enough to dig up, too legendary to ever fully prove. And perhaps that is the most fitting mystery of all for ancient Greece, a civilization that gave us both history and myth and wove them together so tightly that 3,000 years later, we are still trying, gently, in the dark, to tell them apart. Let us turn now to a mystery of the mind, to the very people who taught the Western world how to think. The Greek philosophers. We remember the great names: Socrates, Plato, Aristotle. But behind them stand others, stranger figures, and some of their ideas are so mysterious that we still don't fully understand them. Consider Pythagoras. Most of us know his name from a rule about triangles we learned in school. But the real Pythagoras was far stranger than a mathematician. He founded a secret brotherhood, a society, half school, half religious cult, with strange rules and secret teachings. Its members were sworn to secrecy. They believed that numbers were the hidden structure of all reality, that the universe itself was built from mathematics, and that there was a kind of music played by the planets as they moved, a music so constant that human ears could not hear it, the music of the spheres. They had bizarre rules. They were forbidden, the ancient sources say, to eat beans, forbidden to pick up anything that had fallen, forbidden to look in a mirror beside a lamp. We do not fully understand why. The meaning of these rules was secret and has been lost, and the brotherhood met a violent end. Their secrecy and their power made them enemies. Their meeting houses were attacked and burned, and much of their secret knowledge died with them. So what did the Pythagoreans truly believe? What were their deepest secrets? We catch only glimpses through later writers, who themselves were often guessing. One of the most influential thinkers in history. And he hides from us, behind a veil of secrecy and silence, and the smoke of his burning brotherhood. And consider another, a philosopher named Democritus, around 2,400 years ago, with no microscopes, no instruments, nothing but pure reasoning. He proposed an astonishing idea, that all matter, everything in the world, was made of tiny invisible particles, too small to see, that could not be divided any further. He called them atoms, from the Greek word meaning uncuttable. He was right, more than 2,000 years before modern science could prove it. A Greek thinker had reasoned his way to one of the deepest truths about reality. How? How did he arrive at the truth, with nothing but his mind? Was it a lucky guess? Or did the Greeks understand more by pure thought than we give them credit for? Almost all of Democritus's actual writings are lost. Dozens of books gone. We know of his brilliant idea, mostly because other writers mentioned it, often while disagreeing with him. The man who guessed the secret of matter itself, 2,000 years early, and we have lost nearly every word he ever wrote. Here is a mystery carved in stone and standing in the bright sun for all to see, and still not understood. The temples of the Greeks were not the plain white marble buildings we imagine today. When we picture the Parthenon or any Greek temple, we picture gleaming white stone, pure, austere, elegant, but that image is wrong. The Greeks painted their temples and their statues in bright, vivid color, reds and blues and golds, the serene white marble gods that fill our museums once had painted skin and colored eyes and richly patterned, brightly dyed clothing. For centuries no one believed this. When the statues were dug up, the paint had long since faded and washed away, leaving bare white stone. And so generations assumed that the Greeks had loved pure, colorless marble. This idea shaped Western art for hundreds of years. Our notion of classical beauty, calm, white, restrained, was based on a misunderstanding. It was only when scientists began examining the statues closely, under special light, detecting the faint chemical traces of ancient pigment, that the truth emerged. The Greek world was a riot of color, but here the mystery begins. We can detect where the paint was. We can recover hints of the colors. But we cannot fully know how it all looked, the exact shades, the subtle blending, the overall effect. When modern researchers create painted reconstructions based on the evidence, many people find them startling, even garish. Could the refined Greeks really have painted their masterpieces in such bold, bright colors? Or are our reconstructions missing something, some subtlety, some technique that made it beautiful rather than crude? We have stared at these statues for centuries and gotten them wrong, and even now that we know, we cannot quite see them as the Greeks once saw them. The true face of Greek art, its real colors, its actual appearance, shimmers just beyond our reach. We thought we knew exactly what ancient Greece looked like, and it turns out we had been imagining it in the wrong colors all along. Here is a mystery hidden inside a calculation. The ancient Greeks were extraordinary mathematicians, and one Greek in particular may have been the greatest scientific mind of the entire ancient world. His name was Archimedes. He lived in the Greek city of Syracuse, on the island of Sicily, over 2,200 years ago, and the things he understood were centuries, sometimes millennia, ahead of his time. He worked out the principle of the lever and the pulley, and boasted that with a place to stand and a long enough lever, he could move the entire earth. He calculated the value of pi with remarkable accuracy. He invented machines of war so effective that they held off an entire Roman fleet. For a time, almost single-handedly, giant claws that could lift ships out of the water, and the legend says mirrors that focused sunlight to set enemy ships aflame. Though whether that last one is true is itself a lasting mystery, still debated and tested today. But here is the deepest mystery of Archimedes. In modern times, a faded medieval prayer book was discovered, and underneath the prayers, scholars found something astonishing. The book had been made by scraping clean an older manuscript and writing over it, and the older text underneath was a lost work of Archimedes. When they finally recovered the hidden writing using powerful modern imaging, they found that Archimedes had been working with ideas that come terrifyingly close to a branch of mathematics that would not be formally invented for another 2,000 years. The calculus, the mathematics, that underlies modern physics and engineering. He was reaching toward it, standing at the very edge of it, 2,000 years early. And then he died. Killed, the story goes, by a Roman soldier during the fall of Syracuse while drawing mathematical figures in the sand. His last words, supposedly, "Do not disturb my circles." And his most advanced ideas died with him. The thread was dropped, and it would be 2,000 years before anyone picked it up again. How far might science have advanced if Archimedes had lived longer? If his ideas had been understood and continued, instead of buried and scraped away and forgotten beneath a book of prayers? How many centuries did the world lose? We cannot know. It is one of history's great, unanswerable what-ifs. Here is a final mystery about the end of it all, and a memory of a golden age that may never have existed at all. The Greeks themselves believed in a lost age. In their myths, they told of a time before their own, an age of heroes, a time when great warriors walked the earth, when gods mingled with mortals, when cities were richer and men were greater than in the diminished present. For a long time, this was dismissed as pure fantasy, nostalgic myth-making. There was no lost golden age, just stories. But once again, the ground gave up a surprise. Archaeologists discovered that, centuries before the Greece of Athens and Sparta, there really had been an earlier, brilliant civilization in Greece. We call them the Mycenaeans. They built mighty fortified palaces with massive stone walls, so massive that the later Greeks could not believe humans had built them, and assumed they were the work of giants. The Mycenaeans were wealthy, powerful, literate, and far-reaching. And then, around 3,200 years ago, their entire world collapsed. Not just the Mycenaeans. Across the whole eastern Mediterranean, within the span of a few decades, civilization after civilization fell. Great cities were burned and abandoned. Trade networks vanished. Writing itself was forgotten in Greece for centuries. An entire interconnected world came crashing down in a catastrophe so complete that historians call it the Bronze Age collapse. And here is the great mystery. We don't know why it happened. There are theories, mysterious raiders known only as the Sea Peoples, who appear in ancient records attacking everyone, but whose origins are unknown. Earthquakes, drought and famine, the collapse of fragile trade systems, internal rebellions. Perhaps all of them at once, a perfect storm, a cascade of disasters, each one making the others worse. Whatever the cause, the brilliant Mycenaean world fell into a dark age. The palaces were ruins, writing was lost, and the survivors, in their poverty, looked back and remembered that once there had been heroes. Once there had been greatness. Once men had built walls so vast only giants could have raised them. The Greek myths of a lost golden age were not pure fantasy after all. They were a memory, a true memory of a real lost world, carried down through centuries of darkness in stories around the fire, until it became the Age of Heroes. And so even the myths of Greece that we thought we understood turn out to hide a real and haunting mystery, a whole civilization that rose and shone and fell, for reasons we still cannot fully explain. And so, our journey ends, where all journeys end, back in the quiet of the present. The ruins of the Parthenon still stand tonight, above Athens, under the same stars the philosophers knew. The oracle's mountain is silent now. Atlantis, if it ever was, still sleeps beneath the waves. And somewhere, in the sands of Egypt, or beneath the ink of forgotten books, lost words of Greek genius may still be waiting to be found. So much of ancient Greece we have inherited: our democracy, our philosophy, our science, the very shape of how we think, and yet so much remains beyond our reach: lost plays, undeciphered scripts, melted machines. A poet who may never have existed, a war that may never have happened exactly as it was told, a whole golden age that fell for reasons unknown. The Greeks believed that the dead lived on in a dim and shadowy underworld as long as the living remembered them, as long as their names were spoken, their stories told. By that measure, the Greeks are very much alive. We speak their names every day, often without knowing it. We tell their stories. We puzzle over their mysteries, late at night, thousands of years after they lived. Some of their secrets will be solved in your lifetime. A script will be deciphered. A lost play will surface from the sand. A wreck will give up one more wonder, and some will remain as they are, quiet, patient, half hidden in the bright Aegean light. And maybe that's all right. The Greeks taught us how to ask questions. Perhaps it is fitting that they also left us so many beautiful questions that we can never quite answer. The lamps of Greece burned out long ago, but their light still reaches us across 3,000 years. Sleep well.